Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Let me say that we have begun the course with a concrete topic, which is part of speech tagging. And very quickly, a summary of what was done is that we defined part of speech tagging. We defined part of speech tagging, and our agenda being we'll look at rule-based part of speech tagging, then statistical machine learning based part of speech tagging, and finally neural network based part of speech tagging. Let me remind you again and again that AI has these three approaches: rule-based, statistical ML-based, and neural approaches for any problem. Though the modus operandi today is neural, which makes use of a huge amount of data, but nothing absolutely is better than giving you a clear understanding of the problem when you sit down to create a rule-based system. The need to create a rule-based system, or the process of creating a rule-based system, gives you deep insight into the problem and the constraints which are existing for that problem. So when we create a rule-based part of speech tagger, we have to understand what part of speech tagging means, where does it play a role in the whole NLP stack, the NLP pipeline, and when can we have rules which are complete and correct, 100% precision, 100% recall, though this is impossible. It is an idealization. So we considered and we understood that part of speech tagging is at the second layer above morphology, and morphology has to feed information to part of speech tagging layer for this task to be done effectively. So this is a statement which applies to the whole NLP stack. Every layer feeds information into the next layer and receives information from the previous layer. So this is the way the NLP pipeline or NLP stack operates. And it is also important to be sensitive to the point that what works for L1 need not work for L2, L3, Ln. Okay, the part of speech tagger for English is great to show a concrete example of a technique which is solving part of speech tagging problem, but that is not what will work as such for a different language. So the NLP stack is a layered framework, and it corresponds very well with multi-layer neural network, which has input layer, hidden layer, output layer, and hidden layer can be as many as you want. And deep neural networks are those which have many hidden layers. So there is a natural match between NLP layer and neural network layers, which is why deep learning is now almost the default modus operandi for solving NLP problems. Now, what does morphology layer supply to the part of speech tagging layer? It supplies what is called subwords, the units which are forming a word. My favorite example is jaunga, will go in Hindi, which is consisting of ja and unga. Ja is called the stem, unga is called the suffix. And a huge amount of information is obtainable from the suffix unga. The fact that the person speaking main jaunga is first person, singular number, present tense, and also masculine gender. You see, it also encodes the gender information. Main jaungi would indicate feminine gender. So the fact that words have encoded in them various other information is a very important part of language. Okay, we are not dealing with lifeless data. Okay, we are not dealing with lifeless data. We are dealing with language, which is alive, growing, and has a life of its own. So one sign of a living entity is multiple activities the living entity performs, and has many different features, many different properties. So subword means when you break a word into its parts, what are the units you get? So first and foremost, the natural units are the characters. Jaunga has ja, a, u, anuswar or bindi, ga, and a. So there are these characters, and they form Jaunga. What are the morphemes? Morphemes are the stem ja and unga suffix. What are the syllables? Ja, unga. That is the units which you can pronounce independently. So the word has 3 syllables, ja, and ga. There are something called orthographic syllables where you go up to the vowel and stop there. Okay, so you go up to jau and then bindi and ga. This is an artificial syllable, but later when we do machine translation for low resource languages, we'll see the importance of orthographic syllables. This is an important contribution from our group at IIT Bombay, which shows that for low resource languages, orthographic syllabification increases the data efficiency. Then an idea which is borrowed from speech, automatic speech recognition, is called byte pair encoding. So they are the substrings of words which are very frequent in the corpus. Okay, so what I'm trying to tell you is that below the part of speech tagging layer, where we get the grammatical categories of the words, we have many different ways of breaking a word into its parts. And you have at least 5 options for those units: characters, morphemes.
So,
Yes, please.
so what exactly is morphemes means? How is breaking
Yes.
in?
How is it different from syllable and character? Morphemes are independent intermediaries between characters and syllables. Syllables are pronounceable, independently pronounceable sound units. Okay, ja, ga. So independently pronounceable sound units. Morphemes are independent character units, okay, which have a particular standing in the language. So ja is the stem on which you can place many different suffixes: unga, enge, onge, jaoge, jaunga, jaenge. Okay, many suffixes are applicable to the stem. So a morpheme is a sequence of characters which have independent lexical function in the language. Okay, so I understand I am a bit technical here. What is the meaning of lexical function? We will gradually, explain these concepts as we go ahead. For the time being, just accept this point that morphemes are independent lexical strings which have lexical function in the language. Okay, is it okay?
Sir,
Yeah.
I had a doubt. The Hindi language, each alphabet, like we can see here, ja, and ga, is it already easily broken into syllables? Is it designed that way?
Okay, so no, all languages have syllables. Okay, so if you want to be a little deeper here, syllables consist of what is called onset and rhyme. Onset and rhyme. Okay, now the onset is a consonant cluster. Rhyme is composed of a vowel as the core and another consonant cluster. Okay, so this is universal. All syllables have the structure of onset and onset and rhyme. Rhyme consists of a vowel and a coda. So onset and coda, these are the two consonant clusters which come around a vowel unit. Okay, this is the universal structure of syllables, and all languages have that structure. Okay, so morphemes, syllables are linguistically well-known concepts, very well defined also. Orthographic syllables are, you can say, our introduction. Okay, where the syllable ends with where the character string ends with a vowel. Okay, and why is it done? The reason we do this is that syllabification itself is an ambiguous task. Okay, you can divide a word into multiple syllables. Okay, again, yeah.
So you said this is done for low resource languages or something. What does that mean?
That means that if you want to translate from one language to another by machine learning, then you have what is called parallel corpus driven machine translation. Okay, you teach a machine with parallel corpus, that means translations of sentences. So there you need huge amount of data, especially if you are using deep learning based machine translation. But if you divide a word into its parts and apply machine learning techniques on the parts, then you can reuse parts even if it is not in the training data. Okay, so that helps in reducing the data requirement. Okay, low resource means the amount of parallel corpus, the training data is small.
Can you explain BPE again?
BPE is those strings, those substrings in the word which are very frequent in the corpus. So unga, for example, is likely to be frequent in the corpus. Khaunga, jaunga, sounga. Okay, so this string, this substring unga is very frequent, and you have a probabilistic method, or you can give probabilities to based on the frequency of these substrings. Okay, so that is called byte pair encoding. The encoding is on the bytes which represent the word. Okay, so byte pair encoding we'll have to encounter again in speech discussion as well as machine translation. Okay, so let's move forward. So we saw that part of speech tagging essentially is a sequence leveling problem, where the input is a sentence, sequence of words, and the output is a sequence of part of speech tags. Okay, so what a gripping movie was 3 Idiots. We have the part of speech tags as WP, DT, JJ, NN, VVD, and NNP. And then we also saw that this task is actually an exercise in resolving ambiguity, because words typically have multiple tags. So the example that we took was close, which has adverb, adjective, verb, and noun. Okay, and then from there we understood that we have to disambiguate. We have to solve a multi-class problem. So running close to the competitor will be an adverb for close. So this disambiguation will have to be done using contextual information. So all part of speech tagging, all of part of speech tagging is essentially a disambiguation task applying machine learning. Now we also did a bit of linguistic fundamentals, where we understood the difference between grammatical role and the functional role. The grammatical role comes from the dictionary, functional role comes from the context. So golf stick, golf is actually a noun but functioning as adjective. So we say that golf is an adjectival. So this is the AL rule, where the role of the word, if it is different from the dictionary encoded role, is called the AL rule. Okay, so golf is an adjectival. So then we saw the dictionary meanings of golf and also the example of hungry, and then the learning of part of speech tag is an exercise in training a machine, and there we understood that you need at least as many examples to train the machine as is equal to the number of pause tags minus 1. Okay, so if clause has 4 grammatical categories, adverb, adjective, noun, and verb, then I need to see adjective, adverb, and noun, or adjective, adverb, and verb. 3 out of these 4 should be there in the training data. And by applying the rules of disambiguation, if I cannot decide that it is any of these 3 tags in the training data, then I will take the default option. I'll take the remaining option, which is the 4th tag. Okay, so this is an important observation with respect to the character of training data for part-of-speech tagging. Then we took this example of present, and we wanted to give a rule, always asking if the rule ensures 100% precision and 100% recall. So we made some attempt at creating such rules. If present is preceded by determiner or demonstrative, then part-of-speech tag will be noun. And we immediately found that there is false positive, the present case is not convincing, and false negative, present foretells the future. Then we attempted to repair this rule by introducing an or clause. In addition to precedence by determiner and demonstrative, if the word is followed by a verb, then the part-of-speech tag will be noun. So this is okay. This is working. For example, like present will tell the future, present foretells the future. But then a question was given to you: is this 100% precision and 100% recall? It turns out that this is not the case. Okay, we'll talk about that. So the attempt was to then not to depend completely on rules, but to depend on the data. There may be many situations where a part-of-speech tag has to be given for the word present. But do all those situations occur? I mean, from my brain, from my thinking about the problem, I can imagine many situations. But do all these situations really prevail? And if they prevail with the same frequency, do they have a weightage with respect to the actual experience in the world? Okay, so then there comes this question of ranking the situations, and we should be doing well for those situations where a particular phenomenon is more frequent. If present appears mostly as a noun, then for nouns we should be 100% correct. For other part-of-speech tags, we may compromise a little bit with the accuracy. So now you can see that we are entering probability. Okay, we were automatically picking up probabilistic method. Okay, 100% correct on some situations, less correct on other situations, and you have to give a bound as to how correct you are. Okay, so we have methods for doing this, and we started discussion on noisy channel. So today's discussion will be mainly focused on noisy channel, but I would like to answer some questions that one of your classmates, Mohit, sent by mail to me. They're on the MS Teams channel also, but I thought that they were nice questions, and I'll discuss this in front of the class. You mentioned about ellipsis during the lecture. In NLP, does ellipsis refer to the computational problem that arises due to skipping a few words in a sentence, or the whole act of skipping words is itself termed as ellipsis? Okay, ellipsis is a very frequent phenomenon and very difficult phenomenon. Okay, ellipsis handling comes at what is called the discourse level, at the highest level of natural language processing stack. Now, what does ellipsis literally mean? Okay, ellipse, okay, they all derive from a common Latin root, common Latin root. Okay, I cannot pronounce that Latin root, but all of them mean a kind of occlusion. Okay, covering a part of the information. During eclipse, what happens? There is a shadow on the sun or moon, and the part of the moon or sun is not visible. So in ellipsis also, a part of the text is not visible. Okay, so that is the phenomenon. So now the question is it a computational problem or is it a linguistic problem? It is a linguistic problem. Okay, so we should be always clear about, are we asking a question on computation or are we asking a question on the language phenomenon or linguistics? So I give an example here. Where do you live? The answer is Delhi. And your friend? The answer is Mumbai. So the second question is actually, where does your friend live? Okay, so this question is not complete. Your friend is only part of the question. The other part of the question is eclipsed. It is not visible. So it is an ellipse, and it is nothing to do with computation. It is a language phenomenon. We use it all the time so that we can economize on our energy. Okay, the energy for producing text, energy for producing sound. We always take the least resistance path and try to minimize our energy expense. So where do you live? Delhi, and your friend Mumbai. This is an example of ellipsis. This is a linguistic phenomenon, not a computational phenomenon. But the computational framework will have to deal with this at the discourse level. Second question was, you mentioned about shallow deep parsing. Was this in the context of dependency or constituency parsing? That is, can I say that dependency parser does shallow parsing and constituency parser does deep parsing, or some other similar relation exists between them? No, both constituency and dependency parsing are examples of deep parsing. Okay, they are called deep parsing by convention. So are they really deep? Are they deep enough for all kinds of complex natural language processing tasks? That question is, let's answer this question later. Okay, so there is a kind of fuzziness or gray area about how much is shallow, how much is deep. But constituency and dependency parsing are traditionally looked upon as dependency parsing situations, whereas part of speech tagging and chunking, they are called shallow parsing situations. So I give this example here. The blue sky was vast and deep. The blue sky was vast and deep. If you can see the red string here, can somebody tell me if the red string is visible on the screen? So the blue sky is a chunk. Vast and deep is also a chunk. And see that this chunk depends on accurate part of speech tagging. The DT, blue JJ, sky NN, determiner, adjective, noun, and was vast, adjective and conjunction, and deep, adjective. Okay, so this is the way small phrases are formed in the chunking layer, making use of the part of speech tag information. So recall that chunking comes immediately above part of speech tagging. Okay, so part of speech tagger receives information from morphology analyzer layer and passes information to chunker. So chunking and part of speech tagging are shallow parsing. Constituency and dependency parsing are deep parsing situations. Third question was, in the learning past text slide, it is mentioned we need at least as many instances as number of different levels, number of past text -1 to make a decision. That means corresponding to every tag except one, we are giving one example to the learning algorithm. If the algorithm encounters a previously unseen example, give it the last tag. I just wanted to know if my understanding is correct. You are absolutely correct. This is what we discussed with the example of close also. You will need 3 examples in the training data at least out of those 4, and the remaining one will be obtained as a default case. Then besides my doubts, I have also solved the first homework question that you had provided in the class. Could you please let me know if my answers are correct? Question 1. Example of verbal. I had given you this task of finding an example of verbal. Answer. Could you please Google this topic? Here Google is a noun, but in this context it is being used as a verb. Therefore Google would be tagged as a verbal. No, that is not true. If you look at dictionary, now Google has entered dictionary, and Google is described as both noun and verb in the dictionary. Okay, so if you look at the dictionary maybe 15 years back, when Google was a less known, or less universal entity, then maybe Google was noun in the dictionary, and at that time this example of yours would be correct. Here then Google would be a verbal, but no, not anymore. Google has become a verb also in the dictionary. So you will have to look further, and you will have to look more, but it is not easy. Let me tell you, it is not easy to find an example of a verbal. Okay, then I have not got an example for the second question of finding false positive negative for the rule of present. The rule is if present is preceded by determiner or demonstrative or followed by a verb, then the pause tag will be noun. No, the rule is still not completely correct, because you see it still fails for the example the present situation is comfortable. The rule still applies here because the clauses are linked by or. If present is preceded by a determiner or demonstrative or followed by a verb, then the pause tag is a noun. In this case, it is preceded by a determiner, and therefore it will be tagged as noun, but actually it is an adjective. Okay, so people have seen year after year that creating a rule-based system for part-of-speech tagger fails in different situations, and if really you have to fail, then why not assign some kind of certainty with the rules, and that is what is the data-driven method. So if Mohit is in the class, can you answer if you are satisfied with the answers?
Hello, sir. Yeah, I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Thank you.
What you gave was the false positive for the rule.
Correct.
So it gives means the question was that is the 100% guarantee for precision as well as recall. So
Yes.
for the other one, we would need a false negative also to
Correct.
prove that 100% is not present.
Yes.
So for false negative, can this be an answer? For example, this is the sentence. So at present, the game is on your side. So here, for present, it is not followed by a verb, or it is not preceded by a determinant. Still, it is a noun.
Yes, very good. Very good. It's a good example and correct example. Very good.
So thank you.
Okay, so yeah, so all of us are language machines, you see, all of us are language machines. So we are better than computers in processing language. Okay, so we should be able to find such examples very quickly. Where we lack is in quick processing. Okay, I am no match for a machine when it comes to translating, let's say 10,000 sentences. I'll take an enormous amount of time. I'll be correct, but I'll be taking an enormous amount of time. But a well-trained machine learning model will do this in a time which is unimaginable by me. Okay, so that is the point. Okay, but anyway, we are extremely good language processing machines. Okay, so let me proceed to the mathematics of part-of-speech tagging. So we referred to the noisy channel model, and we remarked that this came from automatic speech recognition. So the input is a sequence of words, the output is a sequence of tags, and we call it noisy for a reason. Remember, it is also called the noisy channel metaphor. Okay, noisy channel metaphor. So what it does is that the channel itself introduces noise into the input, and what comes out as output is looked upon as a corruption of the input. That means I can look upon the part-of-speech tagged sentence as a corrupted version of the input sentence. Okay, the word corrupted here has no negative connotation. It doesn't mean anything negative. It just says that the input has been transformed. So, so noisy channel is a term which state, though it has the word noise is not a desirable situation, therefore it has a negative connotation. But now this notion is no longer existing. The term noisy channel is a very technical and very well accepted term. It is bleached of any kind of negative connotation. So, and there was a small mistake yesterday on the argmax, on the suffix of, lower suffix of argmax. So the argmax expression is on T, and here the second argmax expression is on W. So given W, I get T, given T, I can get W. So the noisy channel can operate both ways. So if I'm translating from Hindi to English, I can also translate from English to Hindi by applying the same technique. Okay. So this method is essentially probabilistic. Argmax, you will recall, returns the argument which maximizes the function. And what is the function that is maximized? This is the probability expression. The probability expression is maximized.